Why good people become monsters, the Lucifer effect. In the tapestry of human existence, few threads are as perplexing and unsettling as the transformation of good people into monsters. This phenomenon, known as the Lucifer effect, challenges our fundamental understanding of human nature and morality. Today, we embark on a profound journey to explore the depths of this transformation, to understand its mechanisms, and to seek wisdom that might help us navigate the treacherous waters of our own potential for evil. The term Lucifer effect was coined by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, drawing parallels to the mythological fall of Lucifer from heaven. Just as Lucifer, once the most beautiful of angels, fell from grace to become the embodiment of evil, so too can ordinary individuals, given the right circumstances, descend into darkness. But what are these circumstances? What forces conspire to turn virtuous individuals into perpetrators of evil? To begin our exploration, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth: the potential for evil resides within each of us. This is not to say that we are inherently wicked, but rather that we all possess the capacity for both great good and terrible evil. The line between hero and villain is far thinner than we'd like to believe. As we delve deeper into this subject, I ask you to consider: in what situations have you felt the pull towards actions you knew were wrong? What stopped you from crossing that line? The Lucifer effect is not about individual bad apples, but about the bad barrels that corrupt good people. It's about the power of situational forces and systemic pressures that can lead ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary acts of cruelty or indifference. This understanding challenges our notion of evil as something inherent in certain individuals and forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that, given the right circumstances, any of us could become the monster we fear. One of the most famous demonstrations of this effect is the Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted by Zimbardo himself. In this study, ordinary college students were randomly assigned roles as prisoners or guards in a simulated prison environment. Within days, the guards began to exhibit cruel and sadistic behavior towards the prisoners, despite knowing it was just an experiment. The situation, the roles they were given, and the power dynamics at play transformed these normal young men into individuals capable of inflicting psychological torture on their peers. This experiment, along with others like the Milgram obedience experiments, reveals several key factors that contribute to the Lucifer effect. First, there's the power of authority and obedience. When faced with orders from a perceived authority figure, many individuals will comply, even if those orders conflict with their personal moral standards. We see this in military contexts, in corporate settings, and even in our daily lives when we defer to those we perceive as having legitimate power over us. Secondly, there's the influence of group dynamics and peer pressure. We are social creatures, deeply influenced by those around us. When we find ourselves in a group that's engaging in unethical behavior, the pressure to conform can be overwhelming. We may rationalize our actions, telling ourselves that if everyone else is doing it, it must be okay. Or we might fear ostracism or punishment if we stand against the group. Thirdly, there's the process of dehumanization. When we stop seeing others as fully human, with their own thoughts, feelings, and rights, it becomes easier to justify mistreating them. This process often begins subtly, with language that reduces people to labels or stereotypes, and can escalate to viewing certain groups as subhuman or undeserving of basic dignity. As we contemplate these factors, It's crucial to remember that understanding the mechanisms of evil is not the same as excusing it. Rather, this knowledge empowers us to recognize these forces at work and to resist them more effectively. It challenges us to remain vigilant, not just against external threats, but against the potential for darkness within ourselves and our communities. I invite you to reflect on a time when you witnessed or participated in the mistreatment of another person. What situational factors were at play? How did you justify your actions or inaction at the time? And most importantly, what could you have done differently? As we conclude this first part of our exploration, remember that awareness is the first step towards prevention. By understanding the Lucifer effect, we arm ourselves with the knowledge to recognize the signs of moral disengagement and the courage to stand against it. In our next segment, we'll delve deeper into the psychological mechanisms that enable this transformation and explore strategies for maintaining our moral compass in the face of corrupting influences. But for now, I leave you with this question. If you found yourself in a situation where unethical behavior was the norm, what would it take for you to be the one to stand up and say, "This is wrong"? The answer to this question may very well be the key to preserving your humanity in the face of systemic evil. The alchemy of corruption, decoding the psychological transmutation of good to evil. As we delve deeper into the abyss of human nature, we find ourselves confronting the intricate psychological mechanisms that facilitate the transformation of good people into monsters. This alchemical process, where virtue is transmuted into vice, is not a sudden leap but a gradual erosion of moral boundaries. It's a journey that begins with small compromises and ends in acts that the individual once would have found unthinkable. The first step in this transformation is often moral disengagement. This psychological process allows individuals to commit harmful acts without experiencing the distress that such behavior would normally evoke. Albert Bandura, a renowned psychologist, identified several mechanisms of moral disengagement. And understanding these can help us recognize the early signs of ethical decay in ourselves and others. One such mechanism is moral justification. Here, individuals reframe harmful behavior as serving a worthy purpose. They might tell themselves, "I'm doing this for the greater good," or "the ends justify the means." This rationalization allows them to maintain a positive self-image while engaging in actions that contradict their moral standards. I ask you to reflect, have you ever justified a questionable action by convincing yourself it was for a noble cause? How did this justification affect your subsequent behavior? Another mechanism is euphemistic labeling. By using sanitized language to describe harmful actions, individuals can distance themselves from the reality of what they're doing. For instance, in corporate settings, downsizing sounds less harsh than firing people, or in military contexts, collateral damage masks the reality of civilian casualties. This linguistic sleight of hand dulls our moral sensibilities and makes it easier to engage in or accept unethical behavior. Displacement of responsibility is yet another powerful tool in the arsenal of moral disengagement. By attributing their actions to the orders of authority figures or to societal pressures, individuals can absolve themselves of personal responsibility. "I was just following orders" becomes a shield against moral culpability. But I challenge you to consider, does obedience to authority truly absolve us of moral responsibility? At what point do we have an obligation to question and resist unethical directives? As we progress further down this dark path, we encounter the phenomenon of graduated exposure. Much like a frog in slowly heating water, individuals can become accustomed to increasingly unethical behavior through gradual exposure. What starts as a minor ethical violation can, over time, escalate into more severe transgressions. Each step seems small and justifiable in the moment, but the cumulative effect can be profound. This gradual process is often accompanied by a shift in identity. As individuals engage in unethical behavior, they may begin to see themselves differently. The narrative they tell about who they are and what they stand for changes to accommodate their actions. This shift can be reinforced by the roles they occupy and the groups they belong to. A person who initially sees themselves as just doing their job may over time come to embrace an identity as a loyal soldier, an efficient manager, or a necessary enforcer of order, regardless of the ethical implications of their actions. The power of situational forces in shaping behavior cannot be overstated. As social psychologist Lee Ross noted, we tend to underestimate the impact of situational factors and overestimate the role of personal dispositions in explaining behavior. This fundamental attribution error leads us to believe that bad actions must come from bad people, failing to recognize how powerfully our environment and circumstances can influence our behavior. But recognizing these forces doesn't mean we're powerless against them. On the contrary, understanding the psychology of moral disengagement equips us with the tools to resist it. We can cultivate moral awareness, actively questioning our justifications and the language we use to describe our actions. We can seek out diverse perspectives and ethical role models who exemplify moral courage in the face of systemic pressures. Moreover, we can work to create environments that support ethical behavior rather than undermining it. This might involve establishing clear ethical guidelines, fostering open communication about moral dilemmas, and creating systems of accountability that don't rely solely on individual willpower. As we reflect on these psychological mechanisms, I urge you to turn the lens inward. What are your ethical red lines? How would you know if you were starting to cross them? It's easy to believe we would never succumb to the forces that turn good people into monsters, but history and psychology tell us that such confidence is often misplaced. Instead of relying on the comforting belief in our own inherent goodness, we must actively cultivate our moral faculties. This involves regular self-reflection, seeking out ethical challenges that test and strengthen our resolve, and being willing to engage in difficult conversations about right and wrong. Remember, the path to ethical living is not about achieving moral perfection, but about maintaining a constant vigil against the forces that would erode our values. It's about developing the humility to recognize our own capacity for wrongdoing and the courage to stand firm in the face of pressure to compromise our principles. As we conclude this segment, I leave you with a profound question to ponder. If you were to design a system or situation that would bring out the best in people rather than the worst, what would it look like? How can we create environments that nurture our better angels rather than awakening our inner demons? In our next part, we'll explore real-world examples of the Lucifer effect in action and examine cases where individuals and groups have successfully resisted the pull towards evil. Through these stories, we'll gain further insights into the practical application of the principles we've discussed and find inspiration for our own moral journeys. Echoes of darkness illuminating the shadows of history and humanity. As we continue our exploration of the Lucifer effect, we turn our gaze to the annals of history and the landscapes of our contemporary world. Here, we find stark examples of how ordinary individuals can become complicit in extraordinary evil. as well as inspiring instances of moral courage in the face of overwhelming pressure. One of the most chilling illustrations of the Lucifer effect in action is the Holocaust. The systematic extermination of millions wasn't carried out solely by sadistic monsters, but by countless ordinary Germans who saw themselves as loyal citizens doing their duty. From the bureaucrats who managed the logistics of deportation to the neighbors who turned a blind eye, the Holocaust demonstrates how a combination of authority, gradual escalation, and dehumanization can lead to unthinkable atrocities. Yet, even in this darkness, we find points of light. Consider the story of Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist who initially sought to profit from Nazi policies, but gradually transformed into a savior of over 1,000 Jewish lives. His journey from opportunist to hero illustrates that the path of moral transformation can also lead towards good, given the right circumstances and personal choices. In more recent history, we see echoes of the Lucifer effect in events like the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. Here, American soldiers, not hardened criminals, but often young men and women from ordinary backgrounds, engaged in the systematic abuse and humiliation of prisoners. This case starkly demonstrates how the combination of authority, dehumanization, and a closed environment can corrupt even those tasked with upholding the law. But for every Abu Ghraib, there are also examples like that of Hugh Thompson Jr., the U.S. Army helicopter pilot who intervened to stop the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War. Thompson's actions remind us that it is possible to maintain one's moral compass even in the most challenging circumstances. These historical examples prompt us to ask, how would we have acted in similar situations? It's comforting to believe we would have been among the rescuers, the whistleblowers, the righteous few. But honesty compels us to acknowledge that, without conscious effort and moral preparation, many of us might have been among the silent majority, or worse, active participants in evil. This realization should not lead us to despair, but rather to a renewed commitment to ethical living and moral courage. We must recognize that the choice between good and evil is not made once and for all, but in countless small decisions every day. Each time we stand up against injustice, each time we choose empathy over indifference, we strengthen our moral muscles and increase our capacity to resist corrupting influences. As we reflect on these historical echoes, I challenge you to examine your own life and society. Where do you see the seeds of the Lucifer effect in your environment? What small compromises or rationalizations might be the first steps on a slippery slope? And most importantly, how can you cultivate the moral strength to be a force for good in the face of systemic pressures? Remember, the greatest safeguard against becoming a monster is not the belief in our inherent goodness, but the humble recognition of our potential for evil coupled with a steadfast commitment to ethical action. In our final segment, we'll explore practical strategies for developing moral resilience and creating environments that bring out the best in humanity rather than the worst. Forging the armor of virtue, cultivating moral resilience in the crucible of adversity. As we reach the culmination of our journey through the labyrinth of human morality, we find ourselves at a critical juncture. Armed with the knowledge of how good people can transform into monsters, we now face the ultimate challenge. How do we fortify ourselves and our societies against the insidious forces of moral corruption? How do we cultivate the strength to remain beacons of virtue in a world that often seems shrouded in ethical twilight? The path forward is not one of naive optimism or rigid moralism, but of clear-eyed realism coupled with unwavering commitment to our highest ideals. We must forge an armor of virtue, not as an impenetrable shield that isolates us from the world, but as a flexible, living embodiment of our values that allows us to engage with the complexities of life while maintaining our moral integrity. First and foremost, we must embrace the practice of constant self-reflection. Just as a warrior hones their skills through daily practice, we must regularly examine our thoughts, actions, and motivations. Ask yourself, am I living up to my own ethical standards? Where have I compromised and why? This isn't an exercise in self-flagellation, but a compassionate yet unflinching assessment of our moral compass. By making this reflection a habit, we create an early warning system for ethical drift. Equally crucial is the cultivation of moral courage. This isn't about grandiose gestures of heroism, but about the everyday bravery of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable or disadvantageous. Start small, speak up against a racist joke, question an unethical business practice, defend someone being unfairly criticized. Each act of moral courage, no matter how minor it may seem, strengthens our ethical backbone and makes the next stand easier. We must also actively seek out diverse perspectives and engage in ethical discourse. Our moral blind spots often stem from insularity and groupthink. By exposing ourselves to different viewpoints and engaging in respectful debate about ethical issues, we expand our moral horizons and develop a more nuanced understanding of right and wrong. This doesn't mean abandoning our core values, but rather refining and strengthening them through challenge and dialogue. Another powerful tool in our ethical arsenal is the practice of empathy and perspective-taking. The Lucifer effect often relies on dehumanization, the ability to see others as less than fully human. By actively cultivating empathy, by striving to see the world through others' eyes, we create a powerful bulwark against this dehumanizing tendency. Make it a point to learn about people from different backgrounds, to truly listen to their stories and experiences. This not only broadens our understanding, but also reinforces our recognition of the fundamental humanity in all people. We must also work to create environments that support ethical behavior rather than undermine it. This involves both personal and societal efforts. On a personal level, surround yourself with people who share your commitment to ethical living, who will support you in doing the right thing and call you out when you falter. Seek out mentors and role models who exemplify moral courage. On a broader scale, we must advocate for systems and institutions that prioritize ethical considerations. This might involve pushing for greater transparency in government and business, supporting whistleblower protections, or working to reform systems that create perverse incentives. Remember, the Lucifer effect isn't just about individual failings, it's often enabled by systemic factors. By working to change these systems, we can create environments that bring out the best in people rather than the worst. Education plays a crucial role in this endeavor. We need to move beyond rote learning of ethical rules to a deeper engagement with moral reasoning and decision-making. Schools, universities, and workplaces should incorporate ethical training that goes beyond compliance to foster genuine moral development. This education should include exposure to historical examples of both moral failures and triumphs, teaching people to recognize the warning signs of ethical decay and the pathways to moral courage. As we strive to implement these strategies, it's important to remember that moral development is a lifelong journey, not a destination. We will stumble, we will face moments of doubt and temptation. The key is not to aim for moral perfection, but for constant growth and renewal of our ethical commitment. I challenge you to take a concrete step today towards strengthening your moral resilience. Perhaps it's starting a daily reflection practice, or reaching out to someone from a different background to learn about their perspective. Maybe it's speaking up against an unethical practice in your workplace, or volunteering for a cause that aligns with your values. Whatever it is, make it tangible and make it a regular part of your life. Remember, in the grand tapestry of existence, each of us is both an individual thread and part of the larger pattern. Our choices, our actions, our moral stands, no matter how small they may seem, contribute to the overall design. By cultivating our own moral resilience and supporting others in doing the same, we can work towards weaving a society that brings out the best in humanity rather than the worst. As we conclude this exploration, I leave you with a final question to ponder. If you were to write the story of your life as a moral journey, what would be the next chapter? How will you use the insights gained from understanding the Lucifer effect to write a story of growth, courage, and positive impact on the world around you? The power to resist becoming a monster, to remain a force for good in the face of corrupting influences, lies within each of us. It's not a power that comes from innate goodness or moral superiority, but from conscious choice, constant vigilance, and unwavering commitment to our highest ideals. As we face the ethical challenges of our time, may we have the wisdom to recognize the forces that can lead us astray, the courage to stand firm in our principles, and the compassion to help others do the same. In doing so, we not only protect ourselves from the Lucifer effect, but become beacons of hope in a world that desperately needs more light.